Gen Z is entering the workforce with new perspectives and expectations.
In this podcast, we're here to listen to their stories and experiences, their successes and frustrations, and help employers understand the mindset and perspectives of the up-and-coming workforce.
Employers can't dictate what their young employees find meaningful. What they can do, however, is empower them to create their own sense of purpose and authentic connections.
Our curriculum is designed to help them do exactly that. East Valley Leader Lab is committed to paving the way for more curious, engaged, and connected young professionals in the workplace. Hello, everybody. I'm Tim Eskew. This is Amanda Stradling, and we are East Valley Leader Lab, and this is our podcast, Mind and Body at Work. If the content resonates with you today, we hope you'll click on the link in our show notes and learn more about our latest offer called Helping Gen Z Thrive at Work. And as always, we'd appreciate it if you would like, share, and or subscribe at our YouTube channel or wherever it is that you get your podcasts. So today, our guest is John Scudder. Welcome, John.
Thank you. Great to be here.
I'll tell you a little bit about him on this card. John is a native Arizonan who works as a human resources manager in the public school system. He previously served as an elementary and middle school principal, and he taught for 10 years prior to that. In addition to his job, John teaches a class for new principals through the Arizona Administrators Association so they can be qualified to evaluate teachers. And as an HR manager, John, part of your responsibility is hiring and bringing in new young teachers. Is that right?
That is correct.
Great. So that's what we want to talk a little bit about today. We'll want to hear what you're observing about these young teachers, just entering the workforce. But first, we've got a couple questions just to kind of set some context for our audience.
Sure.
And I'm going to let Amanda start with that.
Great. So public school is shifting and changing a lot recently, right? How would you say that the demands of the work just in general have changed recently?
Yeah, I think technology certainly has changed a lot of things at school, meaning that, for example, if you were a teacher, even as recently as, 25 years ago, when a parent had a concern, they would have to come to the office or write a letter the next day, right? But now there's an ability, right, with our phones to express a concern at any hour, and teachers have an ability to receive that at any hour, right? So there's, I think, some stressors in the system that didn't used to be there. I think another big stressor for teachers is related to the first for sure is trying to have that work-life separation, very difficult to do, right? There's always more papers to grade or lessons to plan or those kind of things to do. So those are definitely stressors in the system, I think.
That makes a lot of sense. Like a very different pace and an immediacy to everything when it's also available.
Absolutely. Yeah. And after hours many times too, which adds that interesting component, of how do you manage stress when, and this isn't unique to education. I think perhaps all professions in some way have been impacted by this sort of 24-hour, work.
Definitely. Yeah. How do you think teachers are accomplishing their work differently now than they did maybe, like you said, 20 years ago?
Yeah, well, it's funny because teaching is probably one of the professions that looks very much like it did in, say, 1955, right? You have a teacher, you have kids in desks, you have, sometimes they have a tablet instead of a book, but, in many ways, it's a profession that really hasn't changed. It's been very steady. I do think that, the addition of technology has changed things a little bit. Perhaps the expectations, of the school system, those are always a challenge, what people want from it, and those can be different.
Like the parents.
Right? That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
Okay.
Different things important to different people. So the sort of idea of the customer base is very broad, right? You're trying to please a lot of different customers who want different things.
Definitely.
Yeah,
that's great.
I remember in my past life, I always had empathy for the IT department because nobody has more customers than an IT department.
That's right.
Except maybe teachers.
That's right. That's right.
What percentage of the teacher workforce would you say is Gen Z today? What percentage are we talking about?
I would say roughly 25 to 30% is what we're seeing from the human resources side. I'm going to say Gen Z, and I know there's some different dates from different people, but
Sure.
roughly those people in their early to mid 20s, that group. And one of the concerns that comes up with that group for us is there's some new data, I'd say within the last year or two, that about 50% of those young teachers will be gone by their third year. They will leave the profession and go do something
Wow.
else because of the challenges.
Yeah.
So it's definitely something that we're wrestling with. How do we get more of them to stay?
Yeah.
To sustain the profession and sustain education.
Would you say something?
I just have a quick question
Sure.
before we go on to keeping them.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, what do you think's attracting them initially?
Yeah, I think teaching has a sense of purpose to it. Like, let's take Dan Pink has those three areas of motivation in the book Drive, right? He's got purpose, he's got autonomy, and he's got mastery. When people have those three things, they're motivated. Teaching has a lot of purpose, right? And I think a lot of Gen Zers in particular want to make a difference, right? And this seems like a great way to do that. And I think it can be a great way to do it, but it can be very challenging as well.
I think it's a purpose that they've kind of been directly impacted by, freshly coming from the school setting, high school and college. And they're like, I feel that purpose. It helped me. Why not do the same?
It's absolutely amazing when I ask, I'd say teachers of all ages, why do you teach? Almost all of them cite a favorite teacher, right? There
Yep.
was someone that made a difference in their life.
Yep.
And they then want to go make that difference. So I think you're right on with that.
Yeah.
That's great. And that's something that hasn't changed much, right? I mean, that's been there for teachers.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And it's great to hear that it still is, that it's attracting them, because we sure need them.
For sure.
It's interesting that you say you estimate 25 to 30%. The statistics that I'm looking at mostly say, to organizations, you better learn how to integrate these people, manage these people, get along with these people, because they're going to be at least 30%, a third of your workforce by, I think they usually say 2027, 2028. So you guys may be a little bit ahead of the curve.
Could be.
A little bit ahead of everybody else.
Absolutely. And I agree with that sentiment. We really do need to figure out. So many teachers we're seeing now are retiring, it's sort of as these additional stressors have come on board. It's time to, go on to something else. So we really need that incoming group that, again, is going to stay for longer than 3 years. And that 3-year number is pretty significant because there's research that shows that that's about when you hit your stride as a teacher. The first few years, it's pretty difficult to have the skill level to really do well. You need, about 3 years. So if they quit after 3 years, it's sort of right as they're at their peak, that's going to last for a good amount of time. So significant.
And do you historically, just roughly, how long have teachers tended to stay? Is there like an average
That's
retention?
a good question. Yeah, I don't know that, but I will say, teaching, public school teaching is, and some charter public school teaching as well, they still have a pension. So there's a good number that make it the 25 or 30 years to get there,
raise
right?
The average.
Yeah, but one of the things we're seeing in the Gen Z and even prior to the millennial group is that they want to try out different careers. They're not going to stay in the same career for the 25 or 30 years. Right? So there's that challenge as well.
And do you guys have a stated goal for retention? Do you track this over time? And
we do, and it varies. We tend to zero in on a specific grade level or school, when we do that to try to find, where the most challenge is happening. One of the areas, I'm in the elementary school world, K-8. One of the challenges is middle school, trying to get, you think about the importance in recent years of STEM, trying to keep science and math teachers, when many times they'd rather go to high school or college, right? The students are a little older and a little more serious about their studies, and so there's sort of a natural draw there. So that can be an area.
You're saying they don't want to teach 12 and 13-year-olds? That's not the sweet spot for teachers?
Yeah, it takes a pretty special person to work with adolescents for sure. I've heard it said that nobody picks middle school to work in as a teacher. They pick elementary or high school, and then for some reason they're drawn to middle school for that reason.
Kind of like the trombone of band.
It's exactly right. Exactly right.
And I apologize to all trombone players out there.
And to middle school teachers as well,
exactly.
Which I was one, to be clear. So
nice.
Is that where you taught for 10 years, middle school?
I taught all three. I taught high school, I taught middle school, and I taught elementary school. And that is one of the great things about teaching is you can kind of try out different ages and see, what makes the most difference. My first year was in high school, and I found that it just seemed too late to make a difference. I really enjoyed it, but I felt like I wanted to go a little younger, to some sort of a pivotal point in a young person's life to make a difference.
That's wonderful.
Thank you.
I was a substitute teacher for quite a few years for a public charter school district, and I mostly got calls for middle school.
Yeah.
They needed the most substitute support.
Absolutely.
And I think because at the time when I was substituting, I was definitely one of their younger subs, so I had a little more energy to meet the younger group. But I always found it to be a pretty wonderful experience.
Excellent.
They are behaviorally, because it was a K through 12 district, I could end up anywhere.
Right.
Behaviorally, they are the most challenging, but when you connect with them, you can see it does impact them.
Yeah.
So it's a cool age.
It is. There's an authenticity in that age, right, where they'll tell you things, sometimes not in the kindest fashion, right? You have to sort of, work with it a little bit to soften, what they've said. But there is something sort of rewarding about when you win them over, right? When you can see, okay, they respect, what's happening here, and then they're ready to learn.
In teaching, embodied leadership, we talk a lot about the formative years. They're very important in people's development, and kind of has to be, as an adult, you may have to look back to your formative years to understand kind of the way you've come to be. And I think junior high is like the most formative of the formative years, right? Those are the really sensitive years in people's development.
It's so true, and there's quite a bit of data to show that that's the time in life when we're most worried about what other people think, right? That's kind of the shift from when they're younger, right? The parents and the teachers are sort of these powerful figures that they're going to listen to, but gosh, you get to adolescence, and now, right, it's what everyone else thinks. And again, in this era, so much of that's online as well, right? So it just adds a level of complication that makes me happy that I grew up in the era that I did.
Yeah.
For that reason, is definitely complex.
And the teachers we're talking about now did grow up in that era of having that online presence of
That's true.
what people think about them. So we may come back to that. That's kind of interesting.
It is.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about the kids and how they're shifting a little bit.
Sure.
How do you see teachers adapting to maybe a different student population than they've dealt with before?
Yeah, I think, thinking about that younger group of teachers, right, the Gen Z, let's talk about them. That group, they come in with this sort of natural desire to personalize and make it their own. There's the three of us study martial arts, and there's a great quintessential Bruce Lee quote that absorb what is useful, reject what is useless, and add what is specifically your own. I'd say that part of the Bruce Lee quote is really what the Gen Z teachers are picking up on, right? The authenticity part, that this is me, I want to have that part. And it's wonderful because it helps them connect with the students. There is a danger, though, in that as well, because I think if you just add what's specifically your own and sort of skip those two first parts, you're in danger of perhaps some self-centeredness and some, maybe even bordering on narcissism. So how do you balance those two things, or really those three things, with teachers? So I think that's what we work with a lot with the younger teachers. I think teachers who've been in the profession for a while, there it's a little harder to connect with the students, right? There's a certain point where students start going, okay, that person's not the cool teacher anymore, right? What's happening here? And so there, oftentimes, it's getting them to think in the way an adolescent thinks. How does a digital native think differently? Someone who's grown up with all of these, right? And this when there's always been an iPad, there's always been a phone, right? How do they think differently? Not that we don't want to move them towards literacy and actually putting the iPads down and looking away from the phone and having a conversation and shaking hands and doing the human side of it, but to get there, it helps to be able to connect with where the students are coming from. I suppose that's true of any teacher.
Yeah, meet them where they are.
Meet them where they are.
Yeah, and that is so interesting that they probably have more insight into that than the previous teachers have. Maybe a little less of a gap than there has been in the past.
Absolutely, for sure, and you can see it in the students. As I visit classrooms and have a chance to see that they really do tend to connect very well. There's some research from, where was Professor Johnson? I want to say UC San Diego, or maybe it's San Diego State, but anyway, he looked at research of which Title I schools were most effective. So these are schools in higher areas of poverty. And what he found was that there was a certain kind of teacher that was very successful at these types of schools. And I think this is universally true for teachers. And he called them warm demanders. And what a warm demander is I care about you. You can tell, right? As the teacher, like, okay, this teacher cares about me. But that wasn't enough, right? You can just absolutely love the kids in your class and they're not learning any math, right? That's a problem. So you have the demander part too, where I care about you, but I'm going to push you. I'm going to challenge you.
I have expectations.
I have expectations. And if you're not meeting them, I'm going to hold you accountable for those, right? And so those two things really together make that. So oftentimes in the younger teachers, to come back to what we were saying, we're kind of working on the demander side of it. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes when we have more veteran teachers, we have to go back to the warm side of it. Some people are very natural with that. So I'd say that generalization doesn't, of course, always hold true, but that's kind of how that works.
You explained that so well.
Thank you.
And it does go back to the Bruce Lee quote about how you need to accept kind of and respect the traditional things and figure out what's working, keep passing that on and teaching, and don't lose that side, the things that you need to require your students to do, the expectations, as you're adding what's authentic to you.
Absolutely. There's a researcher in education, Robert Marzano, who had a book years ago called The Art and Science of Teaching. And I thought was so brilliant about both the book and the idea is there is a science to teaching. There's certain things, deliberate practice, having an assessment of some kind, right? Being clear about the learning outcome. These are scientific things that we know help students learn. But there's an art too. There's something that some teachers do that they just connect, they inspire, they motivate, right? And so that's that. I'm fascinated with those two things, and I do think the Gen Z teachers very naturally do that piece of the connection in a way that maybe we didn't have before.
That's great. Are there different ways that you see the Gen Z teachers responding to the work offers that they're given?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. This time of year is, we're really preparing for the next school year. Any school district or school is doing that, and the combination of the fact that I think Gen Z and millennial teachers are just they consider all their options. They're less likely to go somewhere, like I said before, get a job, teach in a classroom for 30 years and, come out 30 years later, hopefully not with the same hairdo. They're much more likely to work here and work there and do that. So we see that when we call them to offer positions or even to interview. Well, I'm thinking about this. I'm thinking of, and I don't mean to make that a negative because I do think they are thinking more carefully about, I'm not just going to take the first job I can get. I really want to be cognizant of, is this the right place for me? It's almost in some ways like they're interviewing us as well, if that makes sense.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah. Which, ties in with some of the generalizations that are out there about this generation, is they're very purpose oriented. So, I imagine they're trying to assess, is this gonna give me that sense of purpose? And they're looking at options.
Absolutely. I think something else, another generalization, but it's a generalization because it seems to be true, at least to me, is the awareness of mental health and work-life balance in the younger generation, right? This is, I think, again, one of these things that sort of has two sides to it. My daughter, I have a 19-year-old daughter, and we went to, it was probably about 6 months ago, we went out to eat. And the young lady who was working at the restaurant was obviously having a very difficult time. I don't know if it was her first day or just kind of overwhelmed, but she was doing the job, but you could tell she was, emotionally feeling frustrated. And after she left, my daughter and I had a conversation, and it was so interesting to hear this 19-year-old perspective because she said, she's so authentic. Like I could feel her and I could see she was, wasn't afraid to express herself. And so there's that Gen Z perspective. And meanwhile, Gen X perspective over here, I was like, she really should be hiding that at work. If you're having a bad day, you don't show other people and you try to do it. And as we talked about it more, I could really see there's a strength and a weakness on both sides of this, right? On the Gen X side, there's the danger of, I'm just going to keep going no matter what and, repress those feelings and, all that side of it. Burnout. And then on the flip side of that, the negative, on that other side is, if everyone expresses all their emotions all the time at work, it's probably going to be pretty difficult to run schools.
Yeah. Especially at school.
Yes.
Because teachers are really setting the tone for the children, and kids are so receptive to that energy. But also, especially once you get to junior high, they know when you're faking it too.
They do.
So you're right. There is this... you got to find this middle ground kind of where you're being authentic, but you're still being professional and getting done what needs to be done. So it is a tricky thing, and it takes some skill that I think you got to develop. It takes a little time.
Absolutely. And maybe the goal of those of us who've been in education for a while, as we try to mentor, there's certainly, skills and, like I said, the science of teaching that we can work with. But I think we also need to be learning from Gen Z too, right? Because there are some strengths. Like you said, there's this sort of balance between these two things that, I think it's typical of, it's happened since the days of Socrates, probably before that. So, the younger generation, they just don't do it, they're not, there's something wrong with them. They're, and then years later, they're rock and rolls, whatever it is. Every generation has a younger generation. There's always that gap, right? And I think it takes a wisdom in the older generation that hopefully we have to be able to say, okay, but there's strengths here too. Yeah. Right? We don't have to lose all the tradition, like you said before, but we can look at this and appreciate what's coming here too. Yeah.
And we can understand, if we can share those different perspectives and understand those perspectives a little better, that's kind of the point of this season 2 is, we are talking to both people early in their career, Gen Z people, and we're talking to people who work with them and trying to get past the generalizations that we've all read about.
Absolutely.
Cool. Yep. So to get into some more generalizations.
On that note.
So not generalizations, but what are the patterns that you have noticed in the folks that you're hiring, these younger people entering the workforce as teachers? What are the patterns that in the ones that succeed and stick around? So how do you see them coping and making it, the ones that stick around?
Yeah,
it's not too early.
There was a book a few years ago, Grit. Angela Duckworth wrote that book, Grit, right, about that ability to stick in there, that resilience. And so there's certainly that, right? I think teaching, as you were kind of saying before, Amanda, it's an emotional profession. It's emotional because you're absorbing a lot of emotion, right? That's happening around among mostly the kids, but certainly parents, and a lot of things going on there. So I think skill and being able to deal with that, and keep going, right? Whatever your method is for dealing with that, to be able to know there's going to be some rougher days and there's going to be some amazing days, and to sustain despite that. And I think that is something that we try to do with coaching and mentoring of teachers is, again, not only help the teaching skill, but also talk to them, and kind of, okay, what's frustrating? What are you feeling now that you're away from the kids? What's going on, so that we can help them sort of get some perspective on that too, that there's going to be some people that are unhappy with what you're doing, and maybe you can learn something from that and change your teaching. And some people are going to be unhappy, and you're just going to have to know they're unhappy and keep doing a good job, right? So getting that perspective, that I suppose when you're new to anything, but when you're new to teaching, you don't have that perspective, right? This is so important because this person's unhappy with me.
Sure. Can you think of a time back earlier in your career when you were teaching where you were like, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to keep going?
No, Tim, I was fully confident from the moment I started. I never had a moment of doubt.
I have a feeling you're being facetious.
I'm being very facetious. No, there was definitely times. There was a couple of times that parents, weren't happy and, went to the principal, and that, ended up having a meeting and where I thought, gosh, I don't know if I want to keep doing this. There was a couple of times like that.
Okay.
And that perspective was very helpful because I later became a principal, and sort of, remembering that for myself in that instance. And, sometimes teachers are wrong, right? Sometimes parents are wrong. So the ability to sort of, let's calm down, let's slow down, let's look at the facts, right? Let's think about this. And then later with the teacher being able to do that, it's going to be okay, right? We had this, but let's focus on what's coming, and the good things that are ahead. I think that is the work we need to do to keep them in the profession, to go back to the earlier question.
Yeah,
excellent.
Just from listening to you describe that, the way that you're facilitating this really tense conversation, the emotion's high when a parent is concerned about their kid, and the teacher, it's their passion too, it's their livelihood, and the way that you're managing those emotions and the expectations that are not being met there, and that you are holding compassion for the teacher and letting it be a learning opportunity, holding compassion for the parent and ultimately the child, right?
Absolutely.
That's like a whole slew of skill sets that you're talking about right there. I can just really see how you're embodying that. That's really cool.
Well, thank you. The definition I heard, one definition I heard of wisdom years ago was the ability to take different perspectives, right? But I like the way you said that too, the compassion, perspective too, that when there's a situation like that within a school, the child is suffering in some way. I mean, there's some kind of, internal suffering going on. The parent is, it shows as anger, but it's really, sadness or pain, I think, underneath that, right? And then the teacher is often feeling that too, right? And administrators aren't, superheroes, so they're feeling that, as well. So that, I think, is an incredibly important skill. I think in life, probably, but particularly in the education system, where I learned long ago, we're dealing with the most precious thing in this parent's life, right? I mean, this is such an important product, for lack of a better word, which we don't think of it that way at all, but right, that's exactly what it is. It's like this is so I think over time, I was able to get the perspective of course, this parent is feeling upset about this, right? Of course. I mean, how could they not?
Yeah.
Doesn't mean we have to do exactly what they're saying, but it does mean that I can feel that, right? And sit with it and have a conversation about it. And
Really listen.
Absolutely.
That wisdom has to be really valuable for your teachers and helping them hang in there,
Sure. And then the funny thing about wisdom too, I think, is you can say it, right? But being able to do it in the right moment, that's kind of the key part of it, right?
Yeah.
And I'm certainly not always perfect at that, but I try.
Nice. So I heard you say that the clearest pattern of these young teachers coming in that are doing well and hanging in there is that ability to cope and be resilient and know that tomorrow's another day. And what about have you seen any patterns in some of these young people who aren't sticking it out. Is there something you're seeing that you think, I wish I could help them with that, because I think that's an issue?
Yeah, I think let's go back to Dan Pink's 3. We talked about purpose. The second one is autonomy. Any job, it's difficult for a manager to give complete autonomy, and you know, she or he probably wouldn't want to give complete autonomy to, you know, in almost any circumstance to an employee. But as Dan Pink says, people need some autonomy. They have to have some ability to decide what's happening, right? Or there's this great level of frustration. So I think finding that balance of what can we, there's a philosophy in education called professional learning communities, and it's about getting small teams of teachers to work together, so it's not sort of isolated in silos, but teachers coming together to look at their results. You know, they all give the same test and come together and, gosh, okay, your kids did this. Oh my gosh, your students did really well. Well, what are you doing in your classroom? You know, to facilitate those kind of conversations. And one of the things they say in professional learning communities is schools need to have tights and they need to have looses. And they're talking about for the principal or the administration for the teachers, right? So being clear on what those tights are, but also the areas of autonomy, that this is something you can decide, right? You decide this piece. And if you don't have some areas of autonomy, then they're going to be unhappy in the job, right? They're going to feel that, right? So I think, back to your question, Tim, I think those two things in the education system bump up against each other, meaning a Gen Z teacher wanting maybe even more autonomy than earlier generations, and a school system that's perhaps to try to make up for the complexity and the challenges of society in the world, maybe getting more tight on things. And so those two are kind of
a little more controlling.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Definitely.
Interesting. And so that's the kind of thing that you see younger folks maybe deciding maybe this isn't for me because I'm not getting to express as much as I'd like to express or something.
That's absolutely right. Absolutely right. And then Dan Pink's third point, just to finish, is mastery. That you need to be getting better at your job, or you're not gonna stay with it probably, right? And so to get mastery, you have to be a learner, right? You have to get feedback. You have to be willing to change. You have to be open. And I think that if you're not getting better, you're feeling a different kind of frustration. So let me say it this way: the trying to help a teacher get better probably means less autonomy. So those two are kind of working against each other, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Well, that's really great. I like those 3 points. They apply to so many professions.
Yeah.
I think they really do.
So a little more generalizing, I guess, here. What is a skill that you see that is maybe missing from a lot of the Gen Z teachers?
I think probably, and I suppose it's related to the resilience point, but the willingness to wait for a longer period of time, right? Almost a form of patience, right? It's kind of that I want the results now. I want this to change now. I want this, right? And there's something positive about that, right? Like, let's make it happen. There's sort of a gusto to that, but there's also some things change slowly. And I think anytime you have an institution like public education, I've heard it said it's a cruise ship, not a speedboat, right? So we think about turning a cruise ship versus turning a speedboat. And I think Gen Z is ready to turn the speedboat, right? And it's just not a speedboat, right? And I do like to point out, there's some good reasons why it's not, right? There was an author in the early 70s, Neil Postman, who wrote a book, Teaching as a Conserving Activity, and he was talking about like the education maybe shouldn't be so quick to change. There should be some things in a society that aren't instantly, right? Let's change everything. Let's get rid of all that. There's the tradition, right? There's some things there that you want to keep. So I think it's probably that absorb what is useful piece is missing in a lot of cases. I want to innovate, but I don't want to learn what was in place before that might be really good too.
So a little bit of humility I'm hearing.
Okay. Yeah.
Maybe just an extra measure of respect for the work that's been done all the generations before you,
Yeah.
right? Definitely.
Yeah, I think so. And I think we can help that, meaning the, older educators, if I can put myself in that category. I've never admitted that out loud, but I'll put myself in that category. We can encourage that by really helping them see that we're interested in their innovations as well, and working with them and giving those, being loose, being, giving some autonomy, finding some ways for them to contribute in a way that's important to them as well. Not on everything, all day, all the time, right? But finding that, sort of negotiating that balance a little bit, I think we can do that. Because I do think on our side, again, the older educator and older leader side, we don't often allow for that. We don't see the strength. It's sort of, I guess it's the same problem. It's the humility problem, right? I've gotten here and I know everything and there's nothing I could possibly learn from, this 25-year-old, but there is.
I've just got to say it's reminding me of a TV show called Abbott Elementary.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And they've taken that theme, right, of the young teacher coming in trying to solve every problem from scratch.
Right.
And the more experienced teachers having some fun with that.
Absolutely.
And they work but anyway, it's enough of a common dynamic that the culture is looking at it and playing with it.
I think so. And I've heard, I appreciate that show too. And I've heard from a lot of educators that, obviously it's a comedy, but that's the most realistic educational show there's ever been. That really sort of captures the heart of it.
Yeah. But yeah, it's like this dynamic play, right? Between yin and yang, the old and the new, just kind of growing and evolving together. But you always have to leave room for the other side,
Yeah. And it's sort of like the work never ends, right? You don't get to the certain point, to go along with the martial arts metaphor that, you don't get to black belt. Oh, good. I don't ever have to train again. I know everything. Right. It's all set, right? There's probably a good case to be made that that's the beginning of your training, right? Yep. And same thing here, that as we as leaders get older, that's not time to stop learning, right? That's the beginning,
Yep.
It's beautiful. We've talked a lot already about the strengths and competencies of the newer generation of teachers, but is there anything else you want to highlight about any specifics where they're excelling at?
Yeah, I would say, we're at this interesting time of AI, right? And the, I'd say since probably computers came about, or at least became widespread in the probably early 80s, Apple IIes and Oregon Trail in schools, that there's sort of been this tension of how quickly do we adopt the technology, right? How much is teaching a conserving activity, and how much of it is we got to change and innovate and move fast and break things, right? That tension. AI is kind of the new version of that, and we see the young teachers just jump right in with ChatGPT and AI and all of those pieces. They're very, very comfortable with that. And you can imagine sort of the more traditional language arts teacher, when, mentioning ChatGPT, I'm sure there are some that are fans, but a good number of them are, oh my gosh, this is going to ruin writing. This is going to write. We're going to have a whole generation that can't write. And so there's that tension as well. But I do think, this is a technology that's real and it's here and it's, it's going to change things. So there's a danger of the more traditionalists, I suppose, like there always is, resisting that something that's going to change anyway, right? Yeah, too much. But there's a danger on the flip side of, we don't need to read and write anymore, right? Now that we have this, right? Like, I wouldn't go that far yet.
So they're probably chomping at the bit to use the technology. And so this kind of came up for me earlier. Do you have because they're so comfortable with the technology and used to it, are there issues that come up around not so much pushing, we should use it more, but sort of like using technology inappropriately or, because the kids, they've got to manage that with the kids but they grew up with it. So
absolutely. Yeah. And as we know, the internet is a big, there's a lot of things out there in the internet, right? So if you start using that too rapidly with students without keeping sort of, careful controls on it, then you certainly can end up in sort of tense situations, right? Where kids were given information they shouldn't have been given, or that kind of thing. So yeah, that is something we have to be aware of. So again, back to the heroes in the IT department, I think in every school district they kind of have to keep an extra eye on, and use and have systems in place to make sure that's not happening. And I think to our younger teachers, oftentimes they'll make an error that way, not intending to, right? They're just they're so comfortable with the internet that they'll just start using things without sort of previewing them and making sure they're
right,
safe beforehand.
Right.
Yeah.
Getting out a little too far.
Absolutely.
Over the tips of the skis.
That's right.
My daughter is wrapping up her 8th grade year.
Okay.
And they just did a whole unit on appropriate and helpful ways to use AI and not. And I was very impressed as someone that went to college, like older millennial, to be a teacher. I was really impressed with this course and all of the specific ways they had laid out. Like, see all these great things you can do with AI to like spark your thinking process and to help get dates and facts right. And AI will even write up your source. So it's not that you're plagiarizing. AI can give you the source that you can put in. And it was really cool. And then there are all the things not to do with AI. Do not copy and paste your whole paper. Don't. And they just brought up a lot of things that as a teacher that would have been a little older, I didn't know about. So it was pretty cool.
That is really cool because also this is also new. And again, you put teachers who've been doing it for a long time and doing things the way they've been doing for a long time. They're not going to know necessarily those. The teachers aren't, right? Those pieces that the school systems aren't going to understand. These are the things we're going to have to prevent. Where usually, the education system again is slow to change. It's the cruise ship. So trying to get in front of those things, the technology. I mean, I remember when I was a principal right around the time that all of a sudden everybody had not only an iPhone, but Instagram, Facebook started, I think, and then it was Instagram. Now, all of a sudden, school just sort of changed overnight that you had all these kids that then are carrying that or having access to that all the time. And we would have discipline problems that, for example, over the weekend, a kid would bully another online. It would come into school. And it was so odd to me as a principal, like, well, this happened on the weekend. Like, what's happening here? But the law actually, if it does impact school, we would have to deal with it. And we really had to start thinking, like, gosh, we're gonna have to change our systems here, right? Because there's certain things we can't control, obviously, away from the house, away from the school, in the homes, but and we wouldn't want to. But it was a technology change that we weren't ready for, and it really took us, probably a year to catch up on that.
Yeah. Believe it or not, we are about out of our time. I want to close with a question about. You said you have a goal. It's important to you as an administrator, and I think it's important to us as a society that this generation succeeds in public education. What do you see is the role of administration to try to help with that? What's the role of the principals and the teachers, and then your role in the HR area? Thoughts about that?
Yeah, I thinking about it, school administration in general, or leadership. Let's say it that way in general. I think leading with questions. I think leading by what you said before, Tim, listening is going to be really key. We have all this information and we want to share it and we want to talk about it and do all that, but we need to slow down, right, and ask questions so that not only can we understand better, right, seek first to understand, but also so that we can learn where they need the help, where we can, provide the most support. I think that's key. And I think in education, so many of us are used to talking all the time. When you're a teacher, you talk a lot, right? And so sort of shifting that for these younger generations, I think is going to be key. They're both the students and the young teachers, I don't think are going to sit quietly while we lecture for hours on end. And maybe there's something lost there, but there is something gained in more of a dialogue instead of a monologue, if that makes sense.
Sure. What a great piece of wisdom to end on. I really think that's a good place. John, we appreciate you being here. We wanted to have you on your show because we know you've been in all these different roles and you've been watching it for maybe 2 decades. Couldn't be any longer than that.
I appreciate that. I'll go with that number.
Okay. So thank you very much for being here and sharing your wisdom. I was going to say this is wisdom does not just apply in schools and to teachers. I think it applies to anybody that's trying to be a good leader. So thank you very much.
Thank you both, and thank you for the work you do.
Thanks.
Thank you, John.
And I want to thank our listeners, and we will see you next time. And we wish you to be well and keep moving.
This has been Mind and Body at Work with the East Valley Leader Lab. Please click on the link in the show notes for a description of our newest offer, Helping Gen Z Thrive at Work. This is our embodiment training to help new young workers integrate into your organization.
As always, if this content resonates with you and your cares, please like, share, and/or subscribe to our YouTube channel or wherever it is you get your podcast. Be well and keep moving.